Dad, I want you to retire. I want you to live a long life. I want you to meet your grandson. Your job is killing you. It's stressing you out. They're not treating you all that well at the end of your career. This is a conversation I had with my dad in our annual fishing trip, and is the reason why I'm passionate about studying age in the workplace, because we can do better. We can do better for people throughout their lifespans. And so today I'm here in alignment with my passion to talk to you about generational labels and why we shouldn't use them to describe people of different ages. So what am I talking about here? So generations are a group of people that were born within a certain birth range, and because of being born during that certain birth range, they experience similar things that influence them during key developmental points in their lives. And it stems from sociological research to explain changes, attitudinal changes over time. Things like political movements. And so the assumption here is that these shared experiences that people have make them more alike than different. So if you share this birth range, then you're gonna have more similarities than those that don't share this birth range. I liken it to a backpack because through our lives, we have these formative experiences. They could be economic experiences or historical experiences that are significant to us. And we put them in our backpack and we carry them with us. And they color the way we interact with the world. And so the people who are born during the similar time as us carry similar things. So people who are born around the same time as me probably carry things around 9/11, or maybe the end of the Cold War, or the crumbling of the Berlin Wall. People who aren't born in a similar range of years probably carry something different. And so that's really what we're talking about here. And so it seems intuitive, right? It seems intuitive that these would be a simple, relatively harmless way to describe people and a complex interaction between societal changes and lifespan development. Seems pretty simple. Seems like a nice rule of thumb or a heuristic we can use to provide a better understanding about how we could interact with, work with, manage, maybe even market to different people of different ages. In fact, we're inundated by things in the popular press about generations and how we should work with them, or the generational divide. And we probably are sitting here going, yeah, there must be some sort of data to support this. In fact, there isn't. At least in the workplace literature, it is extremely inconsistent. And so I point our attention to Costanza and colleagues, who conducted a meta-analysis, which is a summary of scientific articles that look at a particular relationship. In this case, the articles are looking at generational differences and workplace outcomes. So they looked at 20 studies, and what they found was there's no systematic difference across these studies that would say that a generational difference caused these different workplace outcomes. And so the outcomes they looked at were things like job satisfaction, commitment, intentions to leave. And they're not the only ones. There's several other researchers have come to the same result, that there's inconsistent and lack of support for these generational differences. Others have argued that we haven't actually fully tested generational differences. And so let me explain what I'm talking about here. So there's 3 factors you have to take into account when you're studying generations. You have to take in chronological age, the birth cohort or the generation, and then the period in which you actually collect the data. And so the primary way that research designs have been conducted are cross-sectional and cross-temporal designs. So let me explain what a cross-sectional would be. So cross-sectional would be me asking all of you a question in the audience tonight. It's one period in time. So it holds the period constant. But any differences I find could be due to chronological age or birth cohort or generation. You cannot differentiate those at this point to make that explanation. A cross-temporal design holds age constant. So let's say I want to study 25-year-olds. in subsequent 10-year periods. So 25-year-olds now, 25-year-olds in 10 years, 20 years, 30 years. What that does, it holds chronological age constant. But yet, any difference I find could be due to generational cohort or the varying period in which you actually collected the data. So we actually haven't fully tested this. In fact, what adds more complexity here is that recent researchers by Costanza and colleagues did additional research looking at the different methods of statistical analysis employed to study generational differences. And what they found is, depending on which method you used, you actually had a little bit different results. In fact, they concluded that really we haven't fully tested by the methods that we've utilized or employed, we haven't fully encompassed and tested generational differences. So even if we've solved all these different design issues, what we're left with are these fuzzy definitions of generations. So which cutoff should we go with? Let me give you an example. Millennials, Generation Y, have been studied as being born between 1982 and 2000, 1980 and 2000. Some people have the cutoffs ending at 1992 and ranging to 1997. In fact, some people have called for two waves of generations, Generation Y and Generation Z. Another thing we need to consider here is that cutoffs are socially constructed, but from whose perspective? Is it US perspective, which is most of this research? Is it regional? Is it the researcher doing the study? Whose perspective? So you should be sitting here being a little bit skeptical since we don't have consensus on a systematic way to actually define these generations. So now I've talked about the empirical side. Let me talk a little bit about my concerns with regard to stereotypes, prejudice, and discrimination. So generational labels essentially are stereotypes. Stereotypes are a generalization made about a group of people based off of a characteristic. So in this case, birth cohort. And they're really an oversimplification of complex differences that are internalized and then ultimately are an accepted form of ageism. So I kind of liken this to a horoscope. You find a few characterizations that ring true. Oh, that sounds like me. But a generational label then becomes this behavior that you look for to reinforce your beliefs about a particular group. And so, in other words, there's kernels of truth, right? You may see it here and there, but it's an overgeneralization of a huge group of people. Let me talk a little bit about this, what I'm talking about, ageism, and this acceptance of it, and this internalization. So if I was to read this, women are lazy, unfocused, demanding, and overly dependent, we'd be shocked. We wouldn't accept this. This is unacceptable. Or Caucasians are lazy, unfocused, demanding, and overly dependent. Once again, not acceptable. Yet the minute I put in millennials, all of a sudden it becomes acceptable. And this is what I'm talking about, that it's an accepted form of ageism. And this accepted form of ageism leads us to have implicit biases or unconscious biases. It's become so embedded in us, we don't challenge it anymore, and we react to it. And because these are negative stereotypes, we have a negative connotation with it, which then leads to discrimination. And so let me provide a little bit of example of what I'm talking about maybe that's happening in terms of discrimination. Would you hire someone who is labeled as afraid of technology, anti-technology, stubborn, and set in their ways? That doesn't sound all that appealing. That's a typical description of a baby boomer. In fact, we have a federal law called the Age Discrimination in Employment Act of 1967, which outlaws us making discriminatory actions against people who are over the age of 40 in terms of employment actions, so hiring, firing, promotion. And so what we found in this last recession is that baby boomers had a significantly longer reemployment time than any of their counterparts. Maybe it's because of these generational stereotypes. Another thing I want to point out, if you were to do a Google search on managing generations in the workplace, It would yield thousands and thousands of articles, giving you thousands and thousands of prescriptions of how to treat this group or that group. A typical one would be give millennials frequent feedback and provide millennials with flexible work schedules and arrangements. Well, doesn't that sound like differential treatment to you by an age group? It seems like maybe we're skirting workplace law here. And in fact, I give these examples because these are beneficial to all employees. We know this through evidence and support that if you give frequent feedback to any employee across their lifespan, they're going to improve their performance. The same thing with flexible work schedules. It helps people throughout their lifespan. So they benefit from it. So why don't we give everybody the same treatment? So I point your attention to this quote. This generation has been disparaged for years now. There's been widespread misconception among the public that this generation are mostly slackers, dropping out of the rat race to sponge off their parents, or barely surviving in low pay, low status, low-term or short-term jobs. Sound familiar? What generation is being referred to here? Maybe you're thinking, oh, millennials. That'd be a good answer, right? In fact, it's Generation X, and it was written in 1995. I could have found an article or a quote about baby boomers when they were entering the workforce also. The reason why I bring this up is that this is embedded in our society. These pernicious stereotypes are embedded, and they could be very hard to overcome. However, we can do it, and we can do better for those across the lifespan. And the ways we can do it is three things. Stop using generational labels ourselves. Bring this up to consciousness. Don't let these implicit biases color us. Bring it up to consciousness and challenge your biases. Challenge others like I'm challenging you to stop using these generational labels. Have them challenge their implicit biases. Have them raise it up to consciousness. And my third point here is to get to know people at a deeper level. By getting to know people at a deeper level, we don't focus at those surface level traits that we label. We actually get to know them and can overcome those stereotypes that we have. In fact, there's research to support intergenerational contact actually leads to lower ageist attitudes. So let's prevent conversations like I had with my dad on that annual fishing trip. We can do better. Generations know. Thank you.